Welcome to From the Spectrum podcast. This is a podcast about autism. It is my goal to explain what is autism. I plan to use a mixture of scientific literature, personal experience, and opinion. With opinion, I will explain why I feel the way I do and give examples. I will provide links to various references for each episode. For each episode, we will discuss various aspects of autism. Before we begin, a brief note on Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger's. Amazingly, Erwin Schrödinger, a Nobel winner for quantum physics, quantum biology, around the time that Kanner was discovering this autistic phenotype, Schrödinger explained about Kanner. He said, Kanner thought what nobody has yet thought about that which everybody sees. Erwin Schrödinger's work is at the core of what causes autism with the atomic molecular level of the cell. The living organism at the cellular level uses light to power their life. Or said differently, light gives life to cells and living organisms. 80 years later, this is all coming about in full circle, and one day, society will understand this. As soon as more people start to view autism and being able to discriminate autism the way Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger's, we have to include Asperger's because he was so critical with this understanding of autism, and piece it together with those quantum biologists such as Schrödinger and Bohr and Einstein, and how light creates life. For today's episode, we will discuss B.3, restricted, fixated interest that are blank in intensity or focus, such as strong attachment to or preoccupation with unusual objects. Not true. This is other people having conflict from something different than them, different from their belief. It offends them. And it finishes with excessively circumscribed or perseverative interest. So I will read it this time the way the DSM explains it. Restricted, fixated interest that are abnormal in intensity or focus, such as strong attachment to or preoccupation with unusual objects, with excessively circumscribed or perseverative interest. Now, there's a lot going on here that I don't like. We can just say obsession. You can see, I couldn't read that completely through. One, I use blank to replace the word abnormal. How can anyone use abnormal with interest, intensity, and focus? A side note, it's a bit of a paradox to me when someone is comorbid autism and ADHD. It is suspicious to me. One objective of today's episode is to prepare for a future episode when we will parse out autism and ADHD and how and why these should be very distinct conditions and not comorbid. And two, after reading Unusual Objects, I explain my opinion. I should preface this. I have intense B.3, both the fixated interest and the perseverative aspect. We will dissect Perseverative later. Remember the language used to define these so-called symptoms. It's crude, with intentions of capturing the spectrum. Remember Hans Asperger's calling those autistic children little professors. This is autism. This is how I think about autism. Because this is autism at its core. This is the center of the autistic phenotype. Some brief notes from Asperger's Autistic Psychopathy Publishing. Autism comes from Bueller. Remember Eugen Bueller. We covered this in the Rates of Autism episode. Autist, from the Greek word autos, has limited interaction. I'm quoting here. The autist is only himself and is not an active member of a greater organism, which he is influenced by and which he influences constantly. Remember, I've said many times on the podcast, and it is my experience and backed by Kanner and Asperger before I even knew about Kanner and Asperger. I say, are you even interesting? Can you pull me away from this creative imagination, the things that I have going on in my head with these visual thinking, the thinking in pictures, and this being fully consumed with a thought or an idea or an interest? Remember, interest and intensity or focus are combined in the symptom, but the DSM uses abnormal. More on that in a bit. This is a path for developing superpowers. Remember, allow us to become little professors. In addition, in Leo Kanner's paper, Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact, Leo Kanner discriminated autism as something different than society's or his colleagues' perception of what was happening. Leo Kanner captured these fixated interests and the social withdrawal of these children. This is what is at the core of autism. He nearly called autism an innate disorder. We should not forget or underestimate the powers and characteristics of the autistic phenotype. Today, we are saturated. We are saturated with different views and different symptoms and conditions being lumped together and confusing. Okay, B.3 is a favorite for me. But remember, B.3 is one of my severe phenotypes. And after I was kind of able to remove myself from those social norms and those social pressures and how society says you must fit in, I was able to cultivate my superpowers, these fixated interests that make me who I am, that ability to be comfortable within myself. Now let's consider something. It's okay to be fixated on few interests, or even one. However, society and education contrast this, especially centralized education. There's lots of criticism within our education system. To normalize this, because of the size of all the educational systems, this ought to be assumed. However, if objectable evidence exists, it needs addressed. We've covered autism and education, one of the most popular episodes. Criticism exists on all levels. What is needed and what is filler? And if filler is a profit trail behind it. Education is a top 10 revenue business in the U.S. It is easy to find. Undergraduates claim a large portion of their coursework was not relevant or needed. There are an arbitrary amount of credit hours required, such as for a bachelor's degree. To my knowledge, all bachelors require 120 credit hours. And if you look at the individual programs, the individual degrees, there are filler courses built into that curriculum to build up the total hours to meet the 120. These are irrelevant classes. This is true in medicine too. A different problem than the 120 required hours, but yet still a problem. It is easy to find various MDs say half or upwards to 98 to 99% is wrong with the School of Medicine. And the concern is, what are the implications to that? You can find the chief neurosurgery, he's a chief of neurosurgeon at UCSF, say, this is incalculable. We have no idea the implications because of this. Charles Sidney Burwell, in 1944, so after Rockefeller medicine, remember we've touched on Rockefeller medicine. So after this began, Burwell said, half of what we are going to teach you is wrong. The problem is we don't know which half. This is the motto of centralized medicine. Carnegie and Rockefeller changed the path of medicine. Also see the Flexner Report. Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Flexner predates Burwell's quote. And the many modern-day concerns by MDs. The status quo within our medicine, the medical field, hasn't worked. Remember the cause of autism episode when we discussed light and all of our biological functions that use light. Life is created using light, water, and magnetism, but medicine avoids especially the light aspect. And this status quo is lacking. It's not providing. Neither has the status quo of the educational system. There's a chance you should consider that last minute to 2 minutes as I began talking about centralized medicine and centralized education. That could be an example of B.3. It's frequent. And you can remember criteria A, which is the social communication and interaction criteria. You know that autistics have a problem with things like joining and ending a conversation and even the back and forth. We often are considered, we say too much. We just keep going on about a certain topic. One, we have no idea how much you know and you don't know, even if you're involved or not involved. We just want to talk about the topic. And those social cues, that's the overall back and forth, speech and language conveyance is very complicated. For this episode, I will use several personal experiences. The language is restricted, fixated interest that are abnormal in intensity or focus. My preference is replacing abnormal with perfect. The earliest experience that I can remember is the Vietnam War. We discussed this in the first episode. Action figures, books, my own version of books in the 3rd grade. Dialogue with others, wanting that dialogue with others about the Vietnam War. Playing, outside play, entire costumes, gears, and toys. Which isn't wrong. It was just the time. Those moments. That's all that mattered. And everything is scheduled around it. So remember B2, how we need to schedule our fixated interest. B2 is the schedule and sameness. When B3 is satisfied, when we can attend to those fixated interests and we get time to perform those or to be present in those, then B2 is more flexible. The strict schedule is more flexible. Another fixated interest as a child, at some point, 12 or 13 or so years old, I made a game, a baseball game, that used averages, probability, and dice. 3 die, or 3 dice, I'm not sure. You roll the dice, and that is the result of the play. Ball, strike, a pop-up, fly ball, single, double, triple, home run, and so forth. The likelihood one of those would happen for a baseball at-bat was the amount of times listed on those options. 15 different options per row using the 3 die. Then you roll until the outcome for that batter. The scorecard is a typical sheet used at scoring baseball games. Teams were either the professional teams on rosters or an early fantasy style drafting. I took this game everywhere. I know I had it at age 13, but I'm not so sure the age that it was created. A highlight was I could play 2 teams like a normal game, of course, but by myself. I didn't need peers. As an adult, I don't have many years of having friends, and certainly not romantic relationships. So I have interest, and I go all in. Guitar was one. I, like many others, learned and taught myself guitar. I would spend all of my free time on it. I have moments of being able to listen to one song for extended amounts of times. Sometimes hours per day, for a week, or just longer. The same song on repeat. Also, as a young adult, I got obsessed with golf and the mechanics of the golf swing, more so. More hours and hours of learning this. These interests can be obsessive. Slightly later in life, I was introduced to older family photos from the 1950s and got consumed with living and growing up in the 50s. Remember, because this accelerated it. Thinking in pictures and supplementing relationships with hypothetical interactions. With the thinking in pictures, it's like it's real. I can put myself in those movies playing in my head. A critical component of this ability is having infinite amount of references, memory, and underlying desires to want the relationships. Or more accurately, desire to increase the history of little conversations and relationships. My guess is those 2 things are independent, but entangled. The thinking in pictures, and then that supplementing relationships with those hypothetical interactions. Independent, but entangled. Next, I had stories about living and growing up in the 50s. So I began a novel. All of these things that I created in my mind, I created a novel based off of those, about a character growing up in a larger, or for the 50s, probably a typical size family. I based it on my lineage. This was an obsession. This was an example of when abnormal is acceptable. I realized that this moment was not healthy. The one or few relationships I had suffered. On vacation, it is all I wanted to do, and mostly what I did do. All of my free time was this. Nothing else mattered. And I was a new father. I wasn't equipped with managing that correctly. I had 17 chapters laid out in my mind and 14 completed. The only thing missing is putting my pictures and thoughts to the Word document for the remaining chapters. Interference, remember some B.2, occurred from human interference and computer issues, was interfering with my ability to keep pace. Remember how the brain is just highly energized. It's just rapidly busting out information, the excitation. Remember B-movie. Remember the sensory processing. Everything's fast. Everything in the thought, in the head, in the thinking and pictures is real rapid at times. Anyway, I could not keep pace with these thoughts. My actions could not keep pace with my thoughts. And the computer broke. Similar to the second episode with breaking the plastic cops and robbers toys when something unplanned or unexpected occurred. I broke it. In future episodes, we will cover autism and ADHD, and we will cover Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger's famous first papers, and we will cover Donald Triplett, Kanner's first child, and Fritz V, the first child observed by Hans Asperger. And we will show that these children and many people with autism have so-called temper tantrums when something is interfered with, when something from the outside penetrates these fixated interests and disrupts them. What I really want to highlight is, today, our modern society, be it providers or family members, even parents, desperate for change, desperate to help their child, they will get tricked into giving the child antipsychotics. We've discussed the role of antipsychotics and the familiar scene to autism. This is not the way. This is very dangerous, in my opinion. We cannot just give autistic children or children with ADHD or any condition psychopharmacology. Besides, rarely is anyone given full informed consent or any bit of informed consent. These are the risk dangers. These are the risk dangers now and for the developing child or even the adult. Remember autism and adaptive responses too. Since when are people so interested and committed to defining unusual objects? My opinion is it is lumped into the overall autistic phenotype. Remember, and this is something everyone should consider, people love to get hitched on things they can observe. It makes sense to them. Now, autism has a spotlight, and it should, but the spotlight of attention brings lots of opinion and confusion. Since when are others so focused on this type of behavior from others? And this is why we will do an episode on the differences between autism and ADHD, both the inattention, the hyperactivity and impulsive areas. Now, when Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger's explain the children with many similarities with modern ADHD, but it's not ADHD. You could say the autistic phenotype is inattention, but now it's just lumped together you get autism and ADHD inattentive type. It doesn't make sense. Zooming out to all, so not limited to autistics, but including autistics. So many people fail to find interest. They fail to pursue their passions and do things that they love to do, they want to do in life. And this happens too frequent in our society. I think this occurs in life. Now, consider everything that comes from that. Regrets, criticism, getting stuck, poor mood, poor effort, and poor attitude. I like to say, attitude and effort are mine, not yours. And this goes hand to hand with B.2 and B.3. This is what I'm going to do. I know how I'm going to do it. And you're not going to stop me. Because quite frankly, I don't need you. I don't need the other people. And it does not bother them. I'm not interfering with them. So why are you wanting to interfere with me? That's something that is constantly happening, especially in socialness, those social interactions or those environments that can offer this. Remember the comparison to the checkout lanes. Autistics are just like the self-checkout lane. Society has changed. Over the past 20 to 25 years, there are less manned checkout lanes and more self-checkout lanes. And people, the masses, not all, but the masses, just simply prefer the self-checkout lane now. They are used to it. And this is autism. From the moment we're born, we're just used to being within ourselves. We will just take care of it with no worries, no need for assistance, no interaction, self-satisfied. The very first words from Donald Triplett's letter, written by his father to Leo Kanner, is, Donald seems self-satisfied. And this was when Donald was 2 and 3 years old already. And remember all the conversations about neuroplasticity, becoming who we are and what we are. And that becomes preferred. The nervous system just likes to respond to it without working, without all that metabolic energy and demand. Remember, the biology that gives us autism allows us to be comfortable within ourselves. This is autism. And this can offend people indirectly without them even realizing it. They must intervene. They must change that person, that autistic child or adult even. That child is different than the other children. Something is going on here. Something needs changed. We must do something. However, remember the superpowers. The paths to superpowers from the autistic phenotype. The biology that gives us autism gives us an ability to be comfortable within ourselves. Don't try to change someone with autism because they are different than you or different from others. Sometimes autism from the outside is a comparison to the so-called normal people. And that's not fair. Circumscribed accelerates this. That limited or confined or restricted. Circumscribed means limited or confined or restricted. This is huge. Others say autistics have circumscribed interest. This is wrong. This is a misnomer. The perception is off and it accelerates divide. It accelerates limitations. It is a human thought, a human creation. My opinion is, people say this. People say that autistics have circumscribed or unusual objects because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to handle it and accept it. And that makes that person uncomfortable. Why are people so involved with other people? And remember, the others, in quotations, that are primarily surrounding autistics have underlying desires and drives to inject, help, and promote change. They could be parents and family, professionals, which could include school support staff, therapists or psychologists, definitely could include ABA therapists, and of course, others, other encounters to lesser involvement, meaning even meaningless encounters. Those people can transfer strange moments that can strengthen those affective disturbances in the autistic phenotype. When we are navigating society and we have these strange encounters, do you think we want to pursue these more or less? Remember those discussions on neuroplasticity, things making us more of what we are. If you have poor social experiences and the biology of the person provides poor socialness, it's not surprising socialness would not be preferred. Remember, this is developed likely in the embryo and through the lifespan with different trials. Let's discuss perseverative. This is repetition including behavior, thought, or speech. The behavior likely makes sense to you because criteria B is restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities. Is perseverative and echolalia similar? Probably. You know the English language does that type of thing. Let's discuss children. If things are going bad, it will be tough to reverse that. The perseverative thoughts will rule the child in the environment. Remember, black and white thinking, rigid. It is either this, such as a good day, or that, such as a bad day. Let's combine other discussions into this. Remember adaptive responses. Autism and adaptive responses. This is a frequent topic for us. It explains a lot about the autistic phenotype. Remember autism and education, the environment that has many implications to the autistic. A lot of opportunity for the negative perseverative thoughts, such as, this is a bad day. There's a lot going on that can be opportunity for the bad day. I hate that. I hate that for the child. I hate that the education system is stuck. Maybe they have perseverative thoughts. Now, another discussion, neuroplasticity. This creates more of that expectation, less trust. Remember, the deficits in oxytocin and oxytocin's role with trust and social motivation and pair bonding. This is all significant. All of these things, the adaptive responses, those environments such as education or employment, and the neuroplasticity, the biology that gives the person autism, all of these components, all of these are entangled. Remember the closeness and shared genetic implications with OCD. We've discussed the striatum, the place where motivation and movements meet. And motivation is related to the nervous system, not so much goal-directed, but just the responses of the nervous system. And it just wants to respond with as little energy as possible during that response. It doesn't know the context. It just acts. The nervous system doesn't know the context. It just responds. It takes deliberate effort and deliberate change to really provoke that other outcome for the nervous system. We have habits, and change is hard. Typically, change is hard because this is why. You could probably understand this. This part, this is not secluded to the autistic. This is all humans. So hopefully you can understand that part. In my mid-30s, 35, 36 or so, I used B.3 for a superpower. I took 1.5, 2 years and just really digested my life to that point. Really discovered my life, what I wanted to do in life, and tried to work towards finding meaning, things that I love to do. My childhood and adolescence and young 20s, even through the 20s, was very complicated. There was a lot of confusion there, a lot of unknown. Why I was the way I was, or why I was the way I am. But in my mid-30s, I really fixated on myself and wanted to discover some sort of meaning and potential. And this was huge. I put all of those social norms that I thought I should pursue, and I removed those. Everything materialistic. And I just found things that I wanted to study to grow myself. And then I pursued those. Now remember, in autism and relationships, I don't have to balance that part of life. And this came directly after that last relationship, if you will. I was able to utilize my time and not be caught up in those social norms. And since then, I have really found relief and optimized my living. Directly after that, led into fixated on the Bible. I spent a few years just fixated on the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. A part of that comes from, as an undergraduate, I pursued undergraduate at this age, late 30s. And it was a Christian university. So that was built into the curriculum. And I really dove into that, and it allowed me to uncover a lot of restrictions. And I was able to just understand life and meaning and not be caught up in what people think we should do or what people typically do. I've said that society is a trap, mostly mid-teens, late teens, and early 20s. Society is a trap there, whereby it forces you to make decisions and people get stuck after that decision is made. And it's hard to change. We talk about change all of the time. And the nervous system, it's hard to be uncomfortable. And our nervous system is just responding. But this was a wonderful first step. There is a lot to learn from the Bible about how we should actually live. Some more recent examples of B.3 is I like to study dog breeds. I like to browse different dog breeds and learn about their personality and some of their history. And this is also true with types of snakes recently. Recently, I've been studying how to identify snakes, and most of these come from this type of snakes within my surrounding area, within around 5 hours. We should consider how society, different aspects of the environment, different aspects of our society is a constant contrast to this autistic phenotype. B.3 is at the core, and all other symptoms or traits or characteristics, whatever the word that you want to use, or the medical literature wants to use, or the professionals want to use, they all stem off of B.3, this innate disorder, or this autistic phenotype. If you're listening to the podcast or listening to the episode, please feel free to leave a review or rating. In podcasting, reviews, ratings, and downloads are huge, and I very much appreciate your feedback. You can contact me on X at RPS47586 for some in-depth conversation about autism. Please feel free to reach out, or on Facebook, or email info.fromthespectrum@gmail.com. And thank you for listening to From the Spectrum Podcast.